Hello students, welcome to this presentation by Mount Kenya University from the School of Education, Department of Educational Management, and the unit is Fundamentals of Pedagogy. The unit code is BEM1201, and my name is Jackson Mobisa Mogeni. Now today we are going to learn about construction of examinations and tests, and the title of our today's topic is Measurement of Learners' Achievement, and with particular reference to types of tests that are used to measure learners' achievement. So before we go into the topic of the day, it's important that by the end of the topic, as a teacher, you should be able to do the following. One is that you should be able to define and explain what is student or learner measurement or measurement of learner achievement. Secondly, you should be able to explain the different types of tests that are used to measure learner achievement. And thirdly, you should be able, as a teacher, to construct different types of tests that are applicable to your teaching subject that can be used to test your learners' achievement every time that you are expected to measure their achievement. So as a start, we shall start by defining what measurement is and why we need to measure learner achievement. Now, measurement has been defined as the process of quantifying an individual's achievement, knowledge, personality, attitudes, habits, and/or skills. It has also been defined as the process by which information about the attributes and/or characteristics of learners are determined and differentiated. In other words, if you want to know the differences in terms of achievement in your learners in a classroom, say the classroom consists of 40 learners, and you want to know their differences in terms of achievement, then the best way to determine their level of achievement is by use of measurement. Measurement has also been defined as a way of determining whether learning objectives have been achieved and whether what the teacher intended to the learners to achieve and to know or to master has been achieved or has been mastered as expected. And in the process of measuring learner achievement, the main tool that is usually used to measure learner achievement is a test. A teacher usually constructs a tool that is called a test that is used to measure the particular learner achievement that the teacher wants to measure or to ascertain whether it has been achieved. And therefore, it is important to know or to define what a test is. And a test has been defined as a tool or technique or a method that is intended to measure students' or learners' knowledge or their ability to complete a particular task. Therefore, in the process of testing, the teacher wants to verify whether the learner has developed the skill or the knowledge or the attitude or the attributes or characteristics that can enable him or her complete a particular task that they are expected to complete after having learned a given skill or attribute. And therefore, a test is therefore used to determine to what extent that skill or knowledge or attribute has been achieved and how the learner is able to apply that skill in future if they will be expected to do that. And therefore, in measuring learners' achievement, there are different types of tests that are used to measure this achievement. However, these tests are mainly classified into two types. They are mainly classified into two broad types, and these two types are, one, objective tests, and the second category are called subjective tests. Objective tests and subjective tests. Let's now first of all define what objective tests are. An objective test is a test consisting of factual questions that require extremely short answers that can be quickly and unambiguously scored by anyone with the correct answer. Therefore, they are those tests that call for short answers, that call for quick memory, and that which require a learner to give a short answer of either one word, or to pick an appropriate answer from a given group of answers, or to write a short phrase or sentence in order to respond to that item or to that question. For the subjective tests, this is a type of a test that is evaluated by giving opinion. In other words, by the learner explaining, using their own language, and giving their own thoughts or opinion about what they have been asked in that question or item. They are more challenging and require a lot of thinking, and in terms of setting this type of test, they are usually time-taking, and they are expensive to administer. They require a lot of time to evaluate correctly, or rather to mark and to validate, or to make them to be valid. In most cases, they depend on mainly how the learner is able to convince the teacher, so that the teacher can score them as being correct. Now, going back to the objective tests, let's now look at the types of tests that are classified or found under the category of objective tests. And there are several types of objective tests, but mainly we shall talk about 4 types of objective tests. That is, 1, the true-false item tests, type of tests. Second, the matching items type of tests. Thirdly, the multiple choice type of tests, and the completion items types of tests. And therefore, let's start with the true-false test items. In this kind of testing, a factual statement is given to the learner, and the learner is required to respond with either true or false to that statement, depending on what he or she feels is the correctness of that statement. Now, if the true-false item does not have 2 choices or answers, if a learner picks true, then it goes without saying that is the only answer that is there. Or if the learner picks false, then that means that is the only correct answer that is there, and there is no other way. And in this case, for the teacher, these kind of items are very easy to prepare, and they are very objective, because the learner has to score or not score. There are no 2 ways about it, and they can cover a wide range of topics because they are very short, and the teacher can set very many items, and the scoring, they usually attract the scoring is usually very, very, very minimal in terms of maybe 1 mark, 2 marks, or half a mark. And therefore, the teacher can set as many items as possible to cover the number of marks, or the total number of score that he or she wants to score. Now, the second type of tests are the matching items kind of test. This is where, in this kind of testing, the learner is expected to connect two different sets of contents or statements, whereby on one side there is a set of statements or a list of statements, and on the other side there is a list of answers that are not organized in a matching order with the test, with the test items or the questions that the learner is being asked. It is therefore for up to the learner to select the right or the correct answer which can match with the kind of item or question that is being asked. In this case, therefore, if the learner is able to match the correct answer with the statement that has been asked, then the learner is said to have scored. And therefore, in this case, for example, if a learner has been given 10 or 20 items, and there are 20 different answers on the other side, then the learner is supposed to match all the 20 answers with their correct statements in order to be able to score for each. For every correct matching, of course, the learner gets the appropriate mark that is supposed to be assigned to those items. And therefore, that kind of test usually has two columns. There is a column A, usually that contains a statement, and there is a column B that contains the answers, and therefore the learner is supposed to pick the correct answer from column B and match it with the correct statement in column A in order to score. And therefore this kind of tests are also easy to set, and they can also be able to cover a wide range of content, because there can be several items or as many items as the teacher would require to test. Now, the third kind of objective tests are what we call the multiple choice test items. In this kind of test, a statement of fact or a factual statement is made. It is then followed by a number of alternatives that are given as answers. These alternatives can be 3, they can be 4, or they can be 5, depending on what the teacher wants to test. Now, from these answers or responses that are given, usually some of the answers are very closely related with the question that has been asked. However, there is only one that is correct. There is only one that is correct, and therefore it is up to the learner to be able to discriminate and be able to pick out which one is the most appropriate or which one is correct. Now, the other ones that are there are supposed to serve as distractors, and they are usually known as distractors. They are supposed to confuse or kind of distract the student from immediately getting the correct answer. And therefore, they require the learner to be able to know exactly the correct answer to the item that has been asked. Otherwise, if they don't know exactly the answer, they might end up picking the wrong option from those given alternatives. Now, at the same time, this kind of tests, even also when setting, it requires a lot of time to set. However, the main advantage is that it can also cover a wide range of content or topics that the teacher has taught, and it can cover very many topics, and the scoring of this kind of answers is very easy. The teacher can mark very easily, and they are very objective in that there are no alternatives, there are no two correct answers to a question, and therefore the learner either scores correctly or they fail to score the correct answer, and therefore there is no guessing of what should have been the correct answer. Now, apart from that, we also have a fourth type of objective type of tests, and this is what we call the completion items or short answer test items. In this kind of test, the learner is given a statement or is supplied with words or a phrase or a figure which the learner is supposed to complete by filling in the part of that statement or the part of that figure that has been left out. The learner is given a part of a statement or a part of a sentence, but the sentence is not complete or the statement is not complete. And therefore, the learner is supposed to figure out and come up with the correct answer that is supposed to make that sentence or that item to be complete and to be correct. Therefore, in most cases, this kind of test is classified as objective test because usually that kind of a statement requires only one correct answer. It requires only one correct answer. Rarely can you get a statement like that that has more than one correct answers. And therefore, this kind of items, they may be presented in form of questions or in form of phrases which learners are required to respond to with a word or with several words to complete the statement. And therefore, even this kind of tests also they are advantageous in the sense that they are easy to mark because the teacher only marks that correct answer, and at the same time they can be able to cover a lot of content by setting questions from different parts of the subject and different topics. They can also be used even to test the different levels of learner understanding in terms of the content that has been covered. Now, let's now switch to the types of subjective tests that we have. Now, in subjective tests, as we said, this is where the learner supplies the answer, supplies all the answer by writing and by arguing out and by using their own words to show that they actually know what they are supposed to respond or what they are supposed to supply as the correct response to the items that they have been asked. And in subjective subjective tests, there are two main types of this kind of tests. And the first type of subjective tests are what we call the restricted response items. Restricted response items. And the second type of subjective tests are what we call the extended response items. Extended response items. Now let's start with the first one, the restricted response items. The restricted response items, they are those questions or items whereby the learner or the examinee, the person who is being examined, provides brief answers which consists of a few words or a few sentences to a fairly structured questions. When we talk about a fairly structured question, it means that that question is restricted to the number of answers that can be provided as response. It does not require a lot of answers. Probably it might require 1, 2, or 3 correct answers. It doesn't have many answers, many correct answers in responding to that question. Therefore, that kind of test items are referred to as restricted response items. They only restrict you to particular responses. You cannot respond, you cannot provide responses outside those that have been identified as the correct answers. And therefore, these answers are usually direct. Even though the learner is writing using their own words, in most cases they are limited in terms of the words that they are going to use to respond to those items. And in most cases you get that such kind of items, usually the number of words that are used to construct a sentence are very few, probably up to a maximum of 6 or so. And therefore the answers are very short. And in most cases the answers provided are either limited between 1 to a limited number of maybe 3, 4, and so on. Then we have the other kind of tests, or the other kind of subjective tests, and this is what we call the extended response items. Extended response items. In these test items, the learner is required to provide lengthy explanation or responses that count heavily in scoring. In this case, they have to explain themselves. They have to use their own words. They have to show that they have understood the questions, and they have to show that they clearly understand what that question requires them to do by providing lengthy explanation of the response. Therefore, these items focus on the learner explaining the major concepts of the content, and they also demand higher order thinking. In other words, they usually are higher order questions. They are higher order questions whereby they don't just require simple responses, simple direct responses, but they require the learner to respond and to justify by arguing and expounding using their own words. Examinees at this point must organize their ideas into multiple ideas and provide supporting information or evidence from what they know for in order to make that response convincing and viable. And therefore, this kind of extended response sometimes require, for example, learners to explain, learners to describe, learners to justify, and so on. And in this case, therefore, they require a lot of explanation or writing from the learner. This kind of tests are very subjective in the sense that scoring will depend on how the learner has been able to convince the examiner through his or her explanation. They don't require just short answer responses without explanation, because the short answers do not prove that the learner knows exactly what the items they have been asked are expected, or the answers they are expected to give in detail. And therefore, let's now move on and look at how we construct tests or different types of tests, and what are the important considerations that we make when we want to construct these types of tests. Now, tests should be constructed and administered in such a way that the marking or the scoring can reflect the ability of the learners that they are testing. They are supposed to test what they are expected to test. They are expected to elicit information from the learner that is consistent with what they are expected to measure. And therefore, any type of test that a teacher uses, is supposed to bring out what the objective of the learning that the learner had learned previously were expected to achieve. Therefore, whenever a teacher is constructing a test, a particular test in any given subject, they are expected to go back and look at the content that they have covered and the objectives that they set out to achieve during every topic and every lesson that they covered, and then from there determine the kind of tests and the kind of test items that they are going to use to measure whether learning was achieved during the teaching and learning process. And therefore, the type of test constructed will depend on a number of factors. One, it will depend on the nature of the content that has been covered. It will also depend on the kind of skill or ability or behavior that is being tested. It will also depend on the nature of the learners that are being tested, and the nature of the learners can be looked at in different ways. For example, the level of their learning, level of their understanding, their ability to respond to certain types of questions, their way of responding to different questions in terms of whether they are able to understand complex or simple questions, whether they are able to interpret objective question easily, or they are able to explain themselves comprehensively. and so on. So, in some cases, some types of tests might require to be constructed by more than one teacher or a team of experts, team of qualified people that are able to test those skills that they want to test. And therefore, in most cases, the process of testing is usually require a lot of concentration, painstaking, and involve a lot of considerations, and as a lot of set of questions from which the teacher can select the particular questions that he or she wants to test. So in this case, therefore, an ordinary teacher can be helped in terms of constructing those tests by knowing what exactly he or she wants to test from the learners. And therefore, it is important that when constructing the tests, that a teacher sets a test that is able to tell him or her the following information, or to give him or her the following information. Number one, what the pupils have learned from his or her teaching. Number two, how well the pupils can perform a particular practical skill or task that he or she has taught, whether they understand the underlying principles of what they have been learning, how quickly and accurately they can work or they can solve problems, how well they can apply what they know to solve problems that they meet from their day-to-day engagements, and if they have been able to develop the intellectual skills and capabilities that they were expected to develop. For example, analyzing, comparing, evaluating, and so on. And therefore, through the use of the sentence, through the use of the test, the teacher can be able to determine what kind of tests or questions, items that they are supposed to include when testing. And from those questions, the teacher is expected to be able to eliminate the following types of questions, which are not expected to be asked by the teacher. One of them are the questions that need, or those items that do not discriminate or distinguish between different learners' abilities in the class. Those items that are not able to distinguish between, for example, high achievers and low achievers and so on, or those that are not able to discriminate the special skills and needs of the students in class, then those kind of questions should be eliminated. The other type of questions that are not supposed to be there are those that are frequently misunderstood, or those that are ambiguous and are not able to be interpreted correctly by the learners. And then thirdly, those questions that have more than one correct answer, especially when setting objective type of questions. And finally, give those questions that give an advantage to certain learners on the basis of the factors other than those that are being tested, the factors other than those that are being tested. For example, learners that have grown up in urban center, they have an advantage than those that have been brought up in rural. And therefore, finally, let us now briefly look at what are the common uses of tests. Why do we test, and what are the common uses of tests? And I'm going to give you 6 brief uses of tests. Number one, tests are used to identify what the students have learned. When the teacher wants to identify what the students have learned and whether they have understood, they use tests to identify what they have learned and to what extent they have understood. Secondly, tests are used to identify the students' strengths and weaknesses. In other words, what areas of the subject have they understood or mastered, or what area of the subject is easy for them and which one is hard. And therefore, the teacher is able to concentrate and determine where to put emphasis in terms of assisting the learners achieve what they are expected to achieve. Thirdly, they are used to provide a method of awarding and recognizing learner achievement. For example, those who have done well are recognized, and they are awarded accordingly. And those who have done poorly, then mechanisms are laid to help them improve in where they are not performing well. Fourthly, tests are used to provide a way to measure a teacher's or a school's effectiveness. A test is used to see whether the school is performing its role and whether the teacher is teaching effectively what they are expected to teach. Then fifth, a test or tests are used to provide a basis for entry into a higher level of learning, into employment, into internship, and so on and so forth. A student who scores a certain kind of score, then they are placed in a level of learning where they are supposed to be placed, having been determined by the kind of score that they have scored. And finally, a test is used to gain entry into college and to continue with further education. They are used to place learners in advanced or post-secondary level of learning, and therefore enable them study and develop their future career opportunities in those colleges and universities, depending on the kind of courses that they have been selected to. And that marks the end of the lesson. And it is important that the teacher is able to determine, when setting a test, what is the purpose of that test and what they expect to get as a result from that kind of test. And to end the lesson, as teachers, I would want to ask you to consider which types of tests are the most applicable in that subject, the subject that you teach. Which kind of tests or which kinds of tests are usually most applicable or frequently applicable in your teaching subject. So thank you so much.
These televised lectures supplement our robust online learning going on our MKU online platform. You can view more on our televised lectures via our online platform. We are in a digital era, and Mount Kenya University knows this. The